So let's discuss it. Green MP Sue Kedgley is with us. She thinks the maceration process and instant fragmentation is repulsive. Next to her is Hans Kriek, also in Wellington. He's the Animal Welfare Officer from the Wellington SPCA. Repulsive, you describe it, Sue. 2.5 million male chicks die in that way each year in New Zealand. Is maceration cruel, Sue, do you think?
Well, I think it is. I mean, in the Animal Welfare Code, which I have here, Paul, it is described as a suitable method of humane destruction, and other methods which they say are acceptable are individually wringing the chicks' necks and chopping off their heads. But I always feel, Paul, that a good test of whether something is acceptable is whether it would be acceptable if we did it out in the open. You know, if all of us could watch what was happening in these factory farms, if all of us could watch these little chicks being sent into a mincing machine and destroyed, how would we feel? We would be repulsed. Obviously, this is one of the ugly truths, the ugly realities of factory farming.
Hans, and there are many other facts or many other parts of the poultry industry too, we'll discuss it in a minute, but Hans Kriek, the SPCA finds the practice acceptable, yes?
The SPCA finds that this is one of the fastest way of killing large numbers of chicks. That's not to say that we necessarily find it acceptable when you look at the ethics of it, killing 2.5 million of little chicks each year so that we can simply eat eggs. You really got to query whether that's a thing that we should all be partaking in.
What about maceration itself, though? I mean, OK, yes. I mean, in Australia, see, the president of the SPCA in Australia, what's his name, Hugh Worth, told us today that maceration's largely been phased out in Australia, that in the poultry industry now they tend to use saturated carbon dioxide to kill them.
Yeah, I understand that we also use the gassing method in New Zealand. Both methods are a whole lot better than what we used to do, how we used to do it in the past in New Zealand, where all these little chicks were simply thrown in plastic bags for them to slowly suffocate. Thank God that has stopped now. And I suppose people have to realise that instantaneous fragmentation, as it's called as well, does kill them instantly. So the length of the suffering for the animal is not overly long. But the issue is really, you know, should we kill 2.5 million chicks after one day of life?
Well, I suppose, as Sue says too, though, the issue is, do you put a live chick into a mincer? You described us to the poultry industry, Sue, to us this afternoon as an industry of secrets. What are some of the other secrets?
Well, the poultry industry is one of those industries which we don't see. We drive by and we just see large sheds, and that's all we'll ever get to see. Yeah. But if we actually peek inside, as some have said, that in fact the chicks that are ground up in these mincer machines may actually be better off than the female chicks, because they end up in these battery hen cages, and they spend their lives in these battery hen cages where they can't even they can't stretch their wings or virtually turn around. So
just stop there for a second on battery farming itself. You say that in Europe battery farming is increasingly controversial.
Battery hen farming is increasingly controversial.
What about now, understand too that the beaks are sliced off the hens in the battery farms?
They are, indeed, and Hans can probably, he's inspected these, he can probably tell
Hans,
you exactly how it's done.
Is that usual practice, Hans?
Yeah, it's quite common practice for hens before they go into the battery cage. Actually, they get sliced off when they're only 5 days old, so they're still very close to that little chick you have there. What they do is they slice the tip of the beak off. The reason for that is that chickens, once they're placed in a battery hen cage, get extremely frustrated because of the small space they have in that cage, and they will start fighting, and they can even cannibalize each other. So the industry, rather than give them more space, decide to take the easy option and simply slice part of their beak off, which is known to cause long-term pain as well if it's done incorrectly or when they take too much off. And that can easily happen because they're only little beaks, and it's really easy to go wrong with that.
So does the SPCA have concerns about the production of chicken meat and eggs in New Zealand?
Oh, absolutely. The SPCA has been well known for being very much opposed to the use of the battery hen cage. And obviously also when you look at the broiler industry, where chickens get slaughtered when they're only 6 weeks old, when they're only still little baby chicks in themselves, really, but they're already 3 pounds heavy, which is a very unnatural way for an animal to grow so fast.
You get in these chicken sheds with the broiler, so-called broiler chickens, you can have 10 to 26,000 chickens all growing in one shed, you know, and really, once again, they've got nothing to do all day. They just sort of peck around on their litter and indeed on their own feces. And I have actually seen all of these things. I've seen the battery hen cages, the row upon row of battery hen cages, the hundreds of thousands of chickens all crammed into these factory farms. And it is repulsive.
Around the world, is maceration as accepted as Maff and Tegel would like us to think it is? I mean, Hans, what's more cruel, gassing them or putting them in the mincer?
For the individual animal, the mincer is probably faster, because gassing certainly will take a little bit longer. So that's right. And Sue is absolutely right when she says that these chicks, in a way, are actually the lucky ones, because they won't go into the battery cage afterwards.
All right, let me go back to Sue. Sue, the Animal Welfare Act of January 2000, right, says that animals can't be treated cruelly. They have to be able to exercise normal patterns of behaviour. So how do we fit battery farming? How do we fit maceration?
Well, we don't. We don't.
Well, so do we need a national debate and a new openness about and from the poultry industry in New Zealand?
We do. Consumers need. It is great that consumers are finally waking up to the reality of what happens to the animals that they are, you know, that we are eating in such large quantities. So that's really great that we're starting to learn what is happening. Clearly, it's not. Clearly, this should not be acceptable under the Animal Welfare Act. And there is a code of layer hens which is going to be consulted on sometime later on this year. And at that stage, there will be, hopefully, a very big debate about whether this is acceptable. And in my view, it obviously isn't. And New Zealanders can actually write in and say to the Minister of Agriculture, this is completely unacceptable. This is cruel. We want the battery hen cages phased out. We are absolutely committed to phasing out the battery hen cage in New Zealand. We could be rearing these animals out in the open in a free-range way. It's perfectly possible, perfectly acceptable, and if enough consumers were to switch and were to buy free-range eggs, for example, the battery hen business would go out of business.
Green MP Sue Kedgley, thank you very much for your time, and Hans Kriek of the SPCA, thank you very much for your knowledge of the matter as well. Now, what can I tell you? We invited Tegel onto the programme tonight. We invited the Poultry Industry Association. We invited MAF, all of them on the programme tonight, asked them several times today. They all declined, said it wasn't proper for them to comment before the outcome of the inquiry tomorrow. So we'll have that outcome of MAF's look at the Tegel operation in Plymouth tomorrow night.